What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Mets Central Podcast, episode 71, as we are going to be recapping the series that the Mets just had against the Milwaukee Brewers, where they take 2 out of 3. Yes, you heard that correctly. They actually won a series for the first time since June 11th against the Washington Nationals. They secure a series. They head into a big weekend here for the Subway Series, which we will talk about. We got a lot to get into here. Before we jump into everything, I ask that you please leave a like on your way in, or if you're watching on replay, subscribe if you guys are new to the channel, especially for Met fans, and turn on your notifications so you know when we upload or go live on the channel. We will get to your comments and questions throughout the episode. It's going to be a little bit shorter because first pitch is quickly approaching us here, and we want to get this up. Plus, it's also July 4th, and happy Independence Day to everyone out there. Hopefully, all of you are having a good time, but staying safe out there, especially on the roads. You never know what idiots are going out there. But Matt, big series against the Brewers. They needed not only to win a series, but especially against a team that was right behind them. And, if the Brewers win the series, sweep them, we're talking about the Mets starting to fall a little bit more in the standings, maybe fall even close to fall out of a wild card spot. So it was really good to see them actually get their heads out of their keisters for once and actually get a series win.
Yeah, it's good to win a series. Obviously, like you said, first since mid-June, where they came off back-to-back sweeps against both the Rockies and the Nationals, and ever since those two series sweeps back-to-back, it's just been not pretty baseball, and it's been a rocky road up until now. Obviously, they had the series split against the Braves back at Citi Field, but when you look at those other series that they played, the one in Atlanta, the one against Tampa, the one in Pittsburgh that just recently happened, like the brand of baseball had not been pretty over this last half a month per se. And yeah, I mean, listen, it's a good opportunity now to build off of this and gain some momentum, because we said coming off the Braves series where they split City Field, we said, okay, they dropped the first two games, but they won the last two games. You got a little bit of momentum back on your side. Now build on it. And they went into Pittsburgh, and we saw how that happened, where they got totally annihilated in all three of those games. But now coming to in this Fourth of July series, and by the way, happy Fourth of July to everybody. They're playing against a struggling Yankee team as well. They're just coming off a 4-game series where they lost 3 out of 4 against the Toronto Blue Jays. So it's an opportunity for this team to build off this series win against the Brewers. And listen, this series, was it the most prettiest of baseball that we've seen? No, but they got the job done. And obviously the first game wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty at all with the bullpen implosion for Reed Garden in the first game. Second game, which the first two games, it was a doubleheader, so it was good on them to win the second game. Very good bounce back performance. And then yesterday, kind of they won the game the way that they were winning games a lot earlier in the season. Really good performance from the starting pitching. The bullpen was reliable, and they didn't put up a ton of runs, but when they had to come through with a clutch hit here or there, they were able to come through. But we definitely need to see a more prettier brand of baseball as the season continues on. And the All-Star break is quickly approaching. I mean, we only have three more series to the All-Star break. Obviously, this one with the Yankees. Then before they head out, not head out west, but head out kind of mid country as,
Midwest.
as as they play the Orioles, and then they play the Royals, and then after the All-Star break, it's only a couple more series, and then we're at the trade deadline. And it's going to be an interesting month to see where this team's going to be at the trade deadline, because do they end up buying? Do they end up conservatively buying? Do they end up selling? These are all questions that are going to be answered over this month in July. So, but yeah, like I said, they got to go into these Yankee series and build up the momentum.
Yeah. And like you said, that last win was definitely more of what we saw earlier in the season. And, similar to last season and just like earlier in the season, we saw a lineup change that kind of paid a little bit of dividends early. We'll see if they build on it, because that's the other thing that you mentioned as well, that they need to build on it. We just saw them win 2 games against Atlanta in a row, and it was like, okay, maybe they're finally going to, get out of the skid and maybe start to take off, because you go beat the Braves 2 times, you play the Pirates. There's a perfect opportunity to really take off. And, imagine the perspective we'd have right now if they took care of business against the Pirates and won 2 out of 3, and then they won the series against Milwaukee. I think all of us would be feeling like on extremely the optimistic front, because you look at this team and it's like they're this banged up, and you were able to salvage that Brave series. You beat the Pirates like you should have, and then you beat the Brewers. Okay, now let's roll into this Yankee series and hopefully take 2 out of 3 there. But unfortunately, that's not the way that it's playing out. But there's still a chance to, pull us back in to that front. And unfortunately, like I said in the post game yesterday, this is where we are right now, where they're in a spot that they have to win us back over. It's unfortunately the case, but that's where we're at. And until they win us back over, I can't sit here and be fully optimistic. I definitely feel better after this Milwaukee series, but there's still, some question marks regarding the bottom of the order, which we're going to get into more. There's still questions of how much pitching could you really get? Because it's not even at this point, it's not even about, okay, can they get pitching and everything? It's about how much pitching could you get? Because this team has 16 players on the IL, and I think something like 13 of them are pitchers, because you have 3 position players, Madrigal, which barely counts, but Siri and Winker, and then the rest are all pitchers on the IL, and they just got another one on the IL today, which Budo, it's an illness. He'll be back. He'll be fine. But, with the injuries to Nunez that popped up, now he needs Tommy John. And then you have the injury to Kranick, which who knows how that's going to go. Tyler McGill got hurt. Manaea is coming back, but, there's still concerns about how much that elbow might hold up throughout the entirety of the season remaining. And just amongst plenty of other injuries, Griffin Canning rupturing his Achilles. So now I'm sitting here like, okay, they're getting wins right now with a banged up staff, but they still have so much pitching to address. Thankfully, at least Brooks Raley, it looks like, is on his returns on the horizon. I'm feeling like he's going to return after the All-Star break, which would be very good for this team. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm just sitting here. I want to be optimistic. I want to sit here and say that, this is like the start of a hot stretch, but I have to see it to believe it, unfortunately.
Well, like I said, this month is gonna. Oh, where did my camera go? All right. Well, as long as you can hear me, I'll talk. I'll try to figure this out. But
Yeah, just fix it when I'm doing the series rundown.
yeah, but no, listen. This upcoming month, like I said, it's going to tell us a lot about this team, because, and listen, it might even help, because even Carlos Mendoza was talking about this yesterday, and even David Stearns when he was doing his press conference, that there's a very good chance that the Mets get both Kodai Senga and Sean Manaea back off the IL and from injury, right before or just after the All-Star break ends, which is huge for this team, because part of the reason right now why why this bullpen is completely banged up. One, I mean, it's and this has been the case for the whole year, but when the offense doesn't score a ton of runs, and you're constantly putting your pitchers in tough spots where you have to where you're pitching in tight situations every single game, and it's like every single pitch is like you have to locate exactly correctly, because you can't load up the bases or give up big hits at the wrong time. So that has definitely put pressure on the rotation. But on the bullpen. But another reason why the bullpen has been banged up is because the starters, and part of it's due to just they're losing a ton of starters to injury, but the starters, the guys who have covered, they haven't gone deep into games. I mean, David Peterson yesterday, and credit to him, I mean, he was one of the MVPs of the series. But, that was the first time the Mets got a starting pitcher that pitched into the 6th inning in, I believe, June. It was the first game of the Braves series in Atlanta. And funny enough, that was actually David Peterson who started the game as well. So hopefully with Manaea and Senga both coming back, because those are two guys, when they're both pitching at their peak, those are two guys that could eat innings, go out there and pitch a very, very reliable game. Obviously with Manaea, when he first comes back, he's probably going to be on a bit of a pitch limit, just so he can work up and get to that full that full workload where he's very comfortable. Same with Senga, but I don't think with Senga it's going to be as long. It's maybe a start or two where he kind of has pitch restrictions, just so just to make sure
He
that
doesn't aggravate anything and
yeah,
just gets ramped up.
he doesn't aggravate anything. But if those guys could get, back into full form like we saw last year, or with Senga, earlier in the year, I think eventually that this bullpen will be well, maybe not be fine totally, but they won't be as taxed, because still, I mean, when you look at the arms in this bullpen, when you compare it to the start of the year, I mean, and I know Davis Stearns has talked about, a bullpen where it's like, bullpens are very versatile, or, the names that you see at the start of the year, they're not going to be there, at the midway point, or maybe even at the end of the year. But this bullpen is like, it's totally different. And there's names in this bullpen right now that, you would not have imagined being on here at the start of the year. So, listen, they're going to go through it right now, and it's part of the reason why the trade deadline is going to be interesting, because even we said it before, it's like, okay, like, sure, there's holes where they're going to have to fix at the bottom of the lineup, like that's a guarantee. But now with all the holes on the pitching staff and the bullpen, it's like, really, how many upgrades can you really make at the trade deadline? So, listen, it's going to be interesting. Obviously, Stearns made a little pickup yesterday with acquiring Zach Pop. Not that he's anything special. This is probably a short-term signing where it's like, get the best out of him for like about a week and a half, 2 weeks, and then you move on from him. And then obviously, we're going to get Brooks Raley back, and hopefully, Budo comes off the IL, with the illness he's dealing with. So, like I said, this month it's all about survival, and win as many games as you can until you get up until the trade deadline.
Yeah, forget about him saying bullpens are very volatile. I mean, this rotation, it seems like, is volatile too, because like you said, imagine seeing these names. Imagine telling us on opening day that you would have Chris Davinsky, Rico Garcia, Justin Hageman, Rich Lovelady, Brandon Waddell, and Austin Warren all on the active roster at the same time with this pitching staff. We would be saying, what the hell went on? What happened, and how many freaking injuries is this team going to deal with throughout the season? And it's just, unfortunately, that's where we are. So they're gonna have to get not only just quality but quantity at the deadline with these arms, because they need some fresh arms at the very least. Because, like you said, I mean, these guys are taxed with the fact that the rotation has been overworked time and time again. But nevertheless, let's get into the recap in totality here of this series. So in game number 1, it was Freddie Peralta versus Clay Holmes in the top of the first inning. It was a kind of a slap in the face, and it was just like a welcome back to Mets baseball moment, as you have a leadoff home run from Sal Frelick. And not fun to start the game, not fun to reintroduce us back in the Mets baseball after 2 days off because of the game being postponed originally on Tuesday, and they moved it to Wednesday, which also screwed the rotation for the series coming up. More on that later. But Frelick ended up making it 1-0. In the bottom of the third, McNeil gets hit by a pitch. Terrence hits a single. Beatty with a sac fly to tie the game up at 1. In the bottom of the fourth inning, Soto walks, steals second. Alonso with a single to make it 2-1. And the Mets had the lead, and it was like, okay, maybe if you get some decent pitching, you'll be able to stay in this game. But at the same time, you do have to blame the offense for not getting it done, which we'll talk more about that in a minute. But in the 6th inning, this is where things hit a bad turn as Yelich walks. Garrett enters the game as Holmes is pulled after 90 pitches, bringing up a very questionable decision by Carlos Mendoza and crew. Terang hits a double to tie the game up at 2, and then Collins with a single. Bowers walks, and Joey Ortiz with a grand slam to make it 6-2. You knew the game was done there. Credit to Brandon Waddell, who saved the bullpen by eating up a bunch of innings that day. But unfortunately, he allowed a home run, which made it 7-2. The Mets went from the 4th inning on without a hit. So that Pete Alonso RBI, that was the last hit the Mets had of the game, just to put into perspective how piss poor that game unfolded. But thankfully, in game number 2 of the doubleheader, they salvaged it a lot, as a very pleasant surprise, as Mizorowski versus Brazoban, who got the opener. And we did see a lineup change, which we'll address that as well. So Lindor moves down to the 2-hole, and they put Brandon Nimmo leading off. And it looks like now they're going to go with the thing where, depending on what hand the pitcher throws with, which is still stupid, but it seems like with that, they are going to dictate whether it is Brandon Nimmo or Starling Marte leading off games. And it worked out, though, in this game, as in the bottom of the second inning with 2 outs, Beatty and Mauricio walk, Sendra with an infield single, getting some help from the Brewers, playing some poor defense. Brandon Nimmo with a grand slam to make it 4-0. And then Lindor goes back to back with him with a solo shot to make it a 5-0 ball game. In the sixth inning, Yelich and Chourio go back to back to make it 5-2. Hoskins with a single. Nunez enters the game and allows a single, then a ground out, which brings in a run to make it 5-3. In the bottom of the sixth inning, Mauricio walks. Hayden Sendra lays down a beautiful bunt, and Lindor drives in a run with a single to make it 6-3. And in the I accidentally messed this up. In the bottom eight, though, Sendra walks Lindor with a double to make it 7-3. And then in the ninth, you have Diaz who finishes a 4-out save, which I can't believe they figured out they could actually use their closer for more than 3 outs, which was a pleasant surprise to see in that game as well. Then we go to game number 3, where it was the former Mets in Jose Quintana going against David Peterson. And David Peterson coming off of 2 really, really bad starts. How would he rebound? It was as good as you could possibly get from him. And like Carlos Mendoza said, we were in attendance for it, and the whole stadium knew how important it was to get over 6 innings from David Peterson. He had a sharp outing, but the Mets offense helped him out a little bit early to give him a comfortable lead for the most part, as Brandon Nimmo, who is on a tear right now, in the bottom of the second, gets a solo shot to make it 1-0. In the top of the fourth, Contreras walks. Hoskins reaches on from an error by Beatty, which he needs to make that play. Caleb Durbin hits a single to tie the game. In the bottom of the sixth, Marte, Lindor, and Soto with 3 straight singles, and that gave the Mets the lead 2-1 as Soto just ever so slightly finds the outfield grass with that single there. And then Alonso had a double, which made it a 3-1 ball game. Monasterio then would hit a home run in the 7th inning to make it 3-2. So all of a sudden, a little worrisome maybe. Ryan Stanek comes in, which we were both saying we thought Buda would come in into this game because he hasn't pitched in a while. We found out why he didn't now. More on that as well later. But Stanek strikes out the side, which he turned in one of his best outings thus far as a New York Met. Just a beautiful splitter on Collins to put him away. And then Diaz on back-to-back nights locks down the save. Unfortunately, now you probably don't have Stanek or Diaz available for game 1 of this Yankee series, but it was important to get these wins. You could tell that there was desperation. And yeah, I'll turn to you now, Matt, and I guess we'll start first with the lineup change. What were your thoughts overall on that? I think a lot of us were saying, and after that game 1 against Milwaukee, I had people in the post game in the chat telling me during that post game stream, maybe there should be a lineup change. Maybe we should look at, moving Lindor out of the leadoff spot just to see if something gets going. And, it ended up working out. But overall, your thoughts on that before we break down the other stuff?
No, I 100% agree with it. Listen, like with how bad the Mets are playing over, these last couple weeks, you had to change something. Now, look, overall, the main change that we want in firing both hitting coaches and Chavez and Barnes, it's probably not going to happen, even though it should happen, and we all want it to happen, but it's not going to happen. The other change that you could have made, but like we keep stating over and over, that it's probably not going to happen again because people say, make a trade, but we're still a month from the deadline. Teams are still there's a lot of teams that are still not decided on whether they're going selling or buy mode at the deadline. A lot of teams are still unsure what they're doing. I mean, you could even throw the Mets in there as currently right now, and that's why I'm saying this next month is going to tell us where this team is going to be by the time we get to the trade deadline. So a big time roster move like a trade probably wasn't going to happen either. So the only move that you could make was switching up some part of the lineup. And listen, I don't love the fact that the Mets are going to go with this whole platoon approach, depending on, if it's a righty or a lefty, starting the game. I don't agree with that. I think Brandon Nimmo currently should be the guy that leads off every single game. Listen, it worked yesterday. Marte, I think he went 2 for 4, but, I don't have full-time trust in Marte being, a platoon DH until the end of the season. But that's a discussion for which we'll probably talk about more as this podcast goes on. But like I said, something has to change. And listen, for the short time that it's happened right now, it's had a positive effect. Obviously, both Lindor and Nimmo have benefited both off that small little change because they both hit big time home runs in the second game of the series. Obviously, Nimmo with the grand slam in the second inning, and then Lindor following up in the second inning as well with them hitting back to back home runs. And then even you saw yesterday's game. Nimmo ends up hitting a home run off Quintana to put the Mets up 1-0. And then the Mets, when they had that little rally late in the game yesterday, I believe it was either the sixth or seventh inning. Both Nimmo and Lindor contributed to that rally. So listen, it's a small sample size as for right now because it's only been 2 games where they switched up the lineup. But so far, the results has been positive in terms of that little switch. And I agree with it continuing it on because listen, if it's going to work. If it's going to work in the short term, if it's going to work in the short term, let's see it now for a little bit. And listen, if it's just a little small 2-game sample size where the things have worked, and then the results kind of start to tamper off a little bit, then sure, then you can go back to switch it to where it's Nimmo in the 2-hole and then Lindor leading off. But as of for now, and the fact that it worked in these last 2 games, sure, go for a week or 2 weeks with it working. Like if it doesn't work, like I said, what's the harm? You just go back to what you were working with, before you made the switch, and then we'll see what happens from there.
Yeah, I agree, especially with the part about Marte where you can't let him lead off. I know he had 2 hits. One of them was an infield hit, though. To me, it's like you gotta have Brandon Nimmo lead off every single game. The only way you could sell me on the platoon thing for the leadoff spot, or I should say, like switching depending on who's pitching, is if this team, which there are rumors heating up apparently about maybe Byron Buxton being an option, which I don't want to get too much into that because I could tell you right now, if they're getting Buxton, there's a pitcher I would like from the Twins as well. But again, I'm not going to get into that because there's still a couple of weeks until the trade deadline to determine if that's even a realistic option. Because the Twins, yeah, they're a little far down the standings, but there's still time. A hot stretch could change everything. But I digress. All I know is that I don't want to see this, the point is, I don't want to see them switch Nimmo out of the leadoff spot unless they have an actual competent right-handed bat to switch with them. Because to me, Marte makes so much more sense in the bottom of the order right now, especially with how much the bottom of the order is still just not giving you much. I mean, you have too many guys that don't even have an OPS of 700 or above. Vientos has been horrible since he came back from the IL. As I know he had a hit yesterday, but he's still not performing up to the caliber you need him to, especially the length in this lineup. Brett Beatty, he's been better since he was called back up, but it's still just not good enough. And he's too streaky right now. Tyrone Taylor looks like a 4th outfielder. He might be in DFA territory, though, once Siri comes back and if this team acquires a center fielder come the trade deadline, which, it would suck to lose Taylor. We love Verone here on the podcast, but unfortunately, it might be what it is with the way that this roster is constructed and the lack of production you're getting. And then Luis Torrens, he had a really good start, but you're not getting the production that you got from him earlier in the year, unfortunately. At the plate, at least he's giving you the defense, but at the plate, you're just not getting enough. And, it would be fine if the other guys in the bottom of the order were hitting, but it's really glaring when you have Vientos, Beatty, Taylor down there not giving you anything right now. So, yeah, they got to definitely, they're going to have to make a lot of moves in that regard. But that's why I think Marte should be hitting in that part of the order, because why not lengthen your lineup a little bit? And then once Winker comes back, you have Nimmo leading off. You get Lindor in the 2-hole, Soto hitting 3rd, Alonso for maybe you put Vientos 5th, and then you have the platoon DH situation in the 6th spot, or maybe depending on who's pitching, maybe you go with Vientos against lefties in the 5 spot, and then against righties, maybe you put him in the 6 spot. Some sort of combination there. But yeah, I mean, that's what I would prefer, but it just looks like it's not going to happen. So we'll see how this lineup is going forward. But I do want to get your thoughts on the thing from game 1 that we definitely need to discuss. The decision to pull Clay Holmes. Your thoughts overall on that, even though we talked about it at the game. I don't understand the decision still. I know he had 4 walks, and I know that he's been fatigued lately from his starts, but to me, it just made no sense still to pull him there against the lower part of the Brewers order, nonetheless.
Yeah, I didn't agree with it either. I didn't because when you looked at the situation and from where the game was, like, listen, sure, Clay Holmes wasn't the sharpest. It wasn't the sharpest start that he's ever had because he allowed the 4 walks, but he was pitching. I thought he was fine. I thought he had the game under control. And again, like, up at that point, he's already at 5 1/3 innings and he's only at 90 pitches. And again, like the bottom to mid part of the order of the Brewers lineup was coming up because okay, sure, like to start the 6th inning, he walks Christian Yelich, but then he gets Jackson Cherry to fly out, and then the next couple batters after that, you have guys like Terang, Isaac Collins, and Jake Bauers. So I I just didn't agree with taking him out there. I mean, listen. I get that you want to be careful and a little bit conservative with Clay Holmes, especially with all the injuries that have happened to the other starting pitchers throughout this rotation. Because if you lose Clay Holmes now, then you're really fucked. Because you basically have a rotation and a half on the IL. So I understand that they want to be conservative and they want to be careful with Clay Holmes, but like I said, he was about to face the mid to the bottom part of the Brewers order. And listen, like I said again, he wasn't his sharpest, but he had the game under control. And listen, on top of that, like Reed Garrett, and again, listen, we love Reed Garrett. He's had a really good season this year, but we can't sit here and hide from the fact that over these last couple weeks, Reed Garrett hasn't been the same pitcher since that we saw at the start of the year. He struggled a little bit, and to throw him into that situation, I fully didn't agree with it. I mean, listen, sure, if Clay Holmes walks another batter or he gives up another hit, then sure, by all means, take him out after that. But the fact that that there was only a guy on first, he just got Jackson Cherry to fly out, and he was only at 90 pitches. I don't agree with it. You should have just let him. You should have just pushed them. Let him finish that sixth. Let him finish that 6th inning. And again, like I said, if he walked another guy or if he gave up another base hit, sure, by all means, pull him. But like I said, he had good control of the game. The game wasn't about to get out of reach. You should have left him in.
And the other part that's still driving me insane about that entire inning is Reed Garrett going to his cutter on that at bat to Joey Ortiz after he allowed 2 hits on the cutter. Why are you going to it there? And apparently he was calling his own pitches, so this wasn't something where you could sit here and say, oh, it's on Terens for calling it. Reed Garrett calls his own pitches, and he's the one that decided to throw a cutter there. I do not understand why he did that. I really just don't get it. And listen, I know that they won the series, but there are still some things with Mendoza where just a little bit questionable in that regard, where I'm still just sitting here questioning certain decisions. Like yesterday, we were at the game and David Peterson goes out there and he's at 90 pitches in the 7th inning. He goes out there for the 7th. Why do you not have Stanek throwing an on the ready right away in case there's trouble? He waits until there's like 1 or 2 batters that gets on base, and then it's like, okay, now let's go get Ryan Stanek up, when he should have been up from the jump. And I don't know. Again, these are mistakes that just can't happen later in the season. It's not a big deal now because they're winning games and things are going their way in that regard. But those are things I just would like to see cleaned up as we progress throughout the season, because those are rookie manager mistakes. Like you said yesterday to me at the game, it's like last season he makes these mistakes. Okay, he's a rookie manager. He's learning. You cannot be making these silly mistakes in your second year managing. To me, that's just not excusable at all. But that's besides the point. Outside of the things that we brought up, I'm not really sure if there's any other conversations you wanted to get into from the series. I mean, the only other thing, like I said, we could really talk about is how David Peterson was great, unless you have anything else you want to discuss from the series.
I mean, I did like the fact because, I mean, even we talked about it, what previewing this series when we did our last podcast. We said that, winning the first game was vital because, coming up against Jacob Mizorowski, who has been really good since being called up by the Brewers, we thought, okay, if they drop that first game, they probably have no shot of winning that second game, especially with how the offense had been performing over the last couple series. And they dropped that first game, and we're all sitting here like, fuck, here we go. They're about to lose another series because Mizorowski's probably about to torch them. But surprisingly, and listen, good on the Mets, and maybe even the lineup change has something to do with this, but they were very patient with Mizorowski, and he had that first. He had a really good first inning where he just went through the order very nicely, but. That second inning, I liked how they attacked him, or at least how they were patient with him, because Mizorowski gets the first 2 outs, and then what's the old baseball cliche? Two out walks, they come back to kill you. And that's what happened because, Brett Beatty draws a really nice walk. He then walks Mauricio, and then Hayden Sanger, Whole Foods man, as we like to call him, the savior of this team. He gets a little lucky because he hits a ground ball up the middle that goes off Mizorowski's glove. Terrain couldn't exactly field it, and right there, boom. You go from 2 outs, nobody on to base loaded with 2 outs, and a lot of the times we always say, when you're a good team and you're facing a team like the Brewers and they make a mistake, if you're a good team, you have to capitalize off those mistakes. And Brandon Nimmo comes up to the plate, and he did something that typically we don't agree with, because one of our biggest pet peeves is, especially when you have a pitcher on the ropes, don't swing first pitch. And we're always like, okay, if you're going to swing first pitch, make sure you do damage. And Nimmo got a fastball up and in from Mizorowski, and he tanked it to right field for a grand slam. And then, obviously, like I said, Lindor comes up after him, hits a solo home run to make it back-to-back home runs, and quickly they went up 5-0. So I really liked how they bounced back and attacked Mizorowski and were patient with him. So it was at least good to see that this offense is capable of doing something like that and jumping all over a really good young pitcher like that. So that was a good sign from there. I mean, listen, the offense after that wasn't exactly the prettiest. They were able to tack on 2 runs later in the game, but at least from that second inning, I like the way that they approached and attacked Mizorowski.
Yeah, especially since one thing that I have to say is that we always sit here and complain about how they don't hit off elite pitching, and then people make the excuse, oh, well, this was a good pitcher. So you're right. Like, we have to sit here and give them credit when they actually do hit off elite pitching, because Mizorowski up to that start was just lights out every single performance. And even in that start in the first inning, like, you saw him chucking 100 and just mowing down this Mets lineup. And it all of a sudden just took a turn for the better. And I gotta give the lineup credit in that regard, because again, I would sit here and say, if they didn't hit off of him, well, you're making all this money, you should be hitting off of elite pitching. Like, there is no excuse, and especially when you're going to see that kind of pitching in October. So very good to see that. And again, hopefully that's going to continue, because they do face a very elite pitcher this upcoming series as well. So they're going to have to show they can continue to do that. But did you have anything else you wanted to get into from this series, or should we just preview the Yankee series?
No, I mean, other than David Peterson, who again looked sharp, and again it was great to see him, have this type of start, especially coming off 2 rough starts. One against the Phillies in Philly, and then against the Pirates in Pittsburgh. So it was good to see him, get back to what the David Peterson that we see, where okay, maybe he did rely a little bit on the defense last night, but that's just the type of pitcher he is. And listen, if it works for him and he gets the results, as we like to say, then listen, by all means, if that's your pitching style and you're comfortable with that, then go out and do it, because it works for him, getting all these ground balls. And would I like to see the strikeouts a little bit more? Yeah, but listen, if he feels comfortable with the fact that he's getting majority of his outs with ground balls or fly outs, then listen, that's your style. That's your style. As long as you're getting the outs and you're getting the results. And then it was good to see the bullpen look good and sharp again, because again, Stanek had been struggling over these last couple of weeks, and it was nice to see him, by the way, utilize a splitter, which is something that we've talked about. It's like, okay, like, listen, you have the 9,900-mile-an-hour fastball, you have the slider, but go to the splitter, because when you look at Ryan Stanek over these last couple of years, when he was pitching for teams like the Mariners and for teams like the Astros, especially when he was on that 2022 World Series winning Astros team, that splitter was arguably his most dangerous pitch, because he got a ton of swings and misses off of that. So good to see that that he actually used and implemented the splitter yesterday, because again, he got swings and misses off of that. So he has to continue that. And then Diaz just But by the way, Diaz, I know Diaz got off to the rocky start this year, but ever since he's turned it around and he's made whatever few adjustments he's made, he's been unhittable. He's been really unhittable. And listen, I'm not saying that this is 2022 Diaz all over again, but he's looking very similar to that type of Diaz that we saw back in 2022. And listen, he's making a run at the All-Star game this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does make the All-Star game. So good on Edwin Diaz, because now it seems like whenever Diaz comes into the game, it's like you're very comfortable with him. It's like 1, 2, 3, boom, boom, boom. Here we go. He's no longer walking the leadoff guy or giving up a hit to the leadoff guy. It's just he goes in there, gets 1, 2, 3 outs, and then ball game is over, which is something that that we'd love to see.
Yeah, on the Peterson front, it's just very unfortunate that he was a little erratic throughout the outing because, 1 or 2 less walks, and you're probably looking at him going the full 7, maybe even getting a chance to go out there for the 8th. Stanek, yeah, it's amazing what happens when you have catchers that actually call the splitter, which I know Alvarez has been better in AAA, but I still can't understand why he refused to call the splitter for Stanek. And it's very obvious when you look at the outings just in terms of the numbers with Alvarez catching versus others for Stanek. But when you just, pay attention, look back at the games and see, yeah, he doesn't call the splitter that much. It's very weird. And then with the Diaz thing, you're right. He's not 2022 Edwin Diaz, but because the velo just isn't there like it was then. Like, let's be real. He's not chucking 100. He's not chucking 92, 93 with the slider. As fun as that would be, you're not getting that, but you're still getting efficiency, and he's just putting his pitches in good locations, and now even throwing a changeup every now and then, which maybe that's something he's going to implement more, and that's going to be the new way that he gets more outs throughout these outings, because if you don't have the velo, it might be a little bit more difficult at certain points, so we'll see if that changeup comes into play more. But let's talk about what's coming up as it is in less than an hour now. The Subway Series, everyone's favorite series that is ultimately just interleague play and meaningless by the end of it all. But it's not meaningless if you live in a divided house the way I do, or if you want to have bragging rights in general. But either way, the New York Mets and the New York Yankees, we found out who the starters were for the Mets, but at the time I made this graphic, which was very late last night, we did not know who was starting. I figured they were going to go to Brazoban for an opener, but it appears that is not the case, as in Game 1, it will be Marcus Stroman, the Mets legend himself, versus Justin Hageman. Hageman on the year in 2 games. He's 0-0, 1.50 ERA. In 6 innings pitch, a .83 whip. We'll see what he could give. I'm just hoping to get somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 innings from him, because then you could go over to Brazoban to maybe get 4 or 5 outs there. If you're lucky, you get 6. And then from there, you could work the rest of the bullpen. So let's see what happens there. And they do have a couple guys back there that could still eat multiple innings. This is where I wish they had Budo, because Hageman and then a Budo piggyback type thing would have been perfect for today. Unfortunately, not the case, but Justin Hageman will get the start. Marcus Stroman is 1-1 on the year. He was injured for a lot. Was not good, though, at all prior to the injury, as he has a 8.16 ERA and a 1.67 whip. That is a pitcher that hopefully the Mets offense could beat up on, especially considering they just hit off Mizorowski. Game number 2, Carlos Rodon versus Yankees legend Frankie Montas. Carlos Rodon is 9-5 on the year, a 2.95 ERA and a 1 whip. He has been very good for the Yankees this year thus far, as they've needed that from him, even though, the record does not indicate how well he has been pitching. A lot of that is because the offense has not showed up for him at points. Frankie Montas 0-1 with a 6 ERA, 1.56. Hopefully he could bounce back from a really, really brutal start against the Pittsburgh Pirates, against the Yankees lineup that has some dangerous hitters. And then in game number 3, it is Max Fried versus, we don't know who it's sounding like. Brandon Waddell might be starting that game. Maybe Brazoban opens that game. We'll have to wait and see. But if it is Brandon Waddell, he's 0-0 on the year with a 2.55 ERA and a 1.13 whip. So, again, that's another scenario where it's like, just give 4 to 5 innings. I feel more good about him giving 5 innings than I do Hageman. So, if you get 5 innings from Waddell, you take that. Versus Max Fried, which that's not fun at all, who's 10-2 on the year, 2.13 ERA and a .94 whip. Probably the favorite as of right now to win the AL Cy Young. And obviously, the Mets are very familiar with facing Max Fried with all those years he was in the NL East. Thank goodness they don't have to deal with him in the division anymore. But man, it's going to be a pain dealing with him on Sunday. If I was to make a prediction for the series, not that I feel great about my prediction, but I'll be optimistic for once and for the sake of it. I'll say they go 2-1. I think they win tonight. I think, or this afternoon rather, and I think they win tomorrow afternoon. They find a way to get it done. The game against Max Fried is where I am worried. Am I confident in my prediction of them going 2-1 in this 3-game set? No, I think that there's a pretty good chance they lose 2 out of 3, to be honest with you. But I'll try to be optimistic for once and hope that it, manifests into something good here.
Yeah, give me 2 out of 3. Give me 2 out of 3. Now look, I could either see I could see the series going in multiple ways. And probably not sweeps just because both teams are just playing just not great baseball as of right now. But I could very easily see the Yankees taking 2 out of 3, and I could very easily see the Mets taking 2 out of 3. I will say the Mets take 2 out of 3. I think this first game, this offense has to destroy Marcus Stroman. Like that's not even a debate. They have to go out and just light him up. Especially, you don't know what you're gonna get out of Justin Hageman today. Ideally, like you said, if you could get 3 to 4 innings out of him, or he's only given up 2-3 runs, you take that, and then you get what you get from the bullpen afterwards. But this offense just has to take care of business today. Destroy Marcus Stroman, get on him early, and get him out of that game early as well. The second game, listen, it's a toss-up. Obviously, Rodon has had a solid season this year. Obviously, with his numbers, 2.95 ERA, a 1 WHIP. He's been kind of up and down his last couple starts. So, we'll see what we get from what the Yankees get from him. And then with Montas, I'm not sure what you're gonna get from Montas. He looked good in his first start against the Braves, and then he looked totally ass against the Pirates. So hopefully you just get something. You get something reliable out of Montas. 5-6 innings, 3 runs. I think that's probably what I'm hoping for. So, because when you look at the third game, and obviously it's not confirmed, although I have seen rumors that most likely it's going to be Brandon Waddell that starts the game. Obviously, there was the rumors yesterday that Brandon Sproat might come up and make his MLB debut and pitch that Sunday game, but just based off what David Stern said yesterday in his postgame, that he doesn't want to call up one of these young guys just for a spot start or, for 1 or 2 starts. If he's going to call him up, he wants to let him have, kind of like a long leash when they come up to the major leagues. So most likely it's going to be Brandon Waddell. And, just because they're facing off Max Fried and, a lot of these Mets hitters, they don't have the best numbers off of Max Fried. And, concerning how well Max Fried pitched against the Mets, when they had that series back in May, at Yankee Stadium. So I'm not too confident in that last game. So I'm saying take 2 out of 3, win the first 2 today, and then tomorrow on Saturday. So yeah, hopefully you take 2 out of 3. And I mean, and also, when you look at the Yankee lineup, you have your guys, of course, so you have to watch out for. I mean, obviously the main guy is Aaron Judge, arguably the best hitter in baseball. And then, you have a couple nice depth hitters as well. Bellinger, Paul Goldschmidt's had a respectable year. But the Yankees lineup as well over these last couple games, they haven't really hit well either, and their pitching has kind of struggled as well, especially their bullpen. So, like I said, especially with facing Marcus Stroman today, you got to beat up on him early and knock him out of the game early.
Yeah, you got to beat up on Stroman. I mean, it's just that simple. Again, especially after you teed off Mizorowski, there's really no excuse to not hit off of him. But yeah, in terms of the lineups for both teams, just might as well run down both lineups while we are here, and then we'll end the stream here. But in terms of the lineup for the Yankees, Jason Dominguez is leading off, Judge batting second, Bellinger is hitting third, and then hitting cleanup, another hitter that is always a threat because he's a thorn in the Mets side and always has been throughout his career. Giancarlo Stanton, inevitably going to pants the Mets at some point throughout this Subway Series. It's just how it is. Jazz Chisholm, Paul Goldschmidt. They have JC Escara hitting 7th, Volpe hitting 8th, which Yankee fans want him ran out of town right now. So we'll see what that's about. And then DJ LeMahieu's batting 9th for the Mets lineup. Nimmo's leading off like we talked about all episode with that lineup change. And then it is Lindor, who is batting second, Soto third, Alonso fourth, McNeil fifth, Terren sixth, Beatty seventh, Mauricio eighth, and then Tyrone Taylor is batting ninth. So Mauricio getting the reps at DH today, which is pretty interesting. And on top of that, I mean, no Mark Vientos, which is also very interesting, but I'm also glad about that because he deserves to be sitting right now. He has not played good ball at all. And, we didn't even talk about it really in that game where Brett Beatty made that error, which in game 3, which he should have made the play, but he shouldn't be playing second base. And Mark Vientos should be playing at all. Like that, it's just that simple. But we're going to wrap things up here. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you guys are new. Turn on your notifications so you know when we upload or go live next. And we'll see you guys in the next one.